did it. A miracle. Another miracle yet again. Fantastic. Okay, very good. So we're going to start off with Acharie and Kedoshim, but before we begin, let's start off with our prayer. Oh, here comes Hannah. That's nice. All right. There we go. Now, Zoom somehow sort of, it disappeared on me. There we go. Oh, I can do share like that. That's it. All right. Good. All right. So, want to daven to protect the soldiers, and for Shalema, for Mordechai ben Mashalea, and Hananiah David ben Keren Ruth. For Shalema, and Kol HaPtuim v'Kol Acholei Yisrael. Amen. ריבון העולמים ואדוני אדונים, אב רחמן וסליחות, מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, וקידה בשתחוויה שקרבתנו לתורתך ולעבודתך עבודת הקודש, ונתת לנו חלק בסודות תורתך הקדושה, מה אנו ומה חיינו, אשר עשית עמנו חסד גדול כזה, על כן אנחנו מפילים תחנוננו לפניך, שתמחול ותסלח לכל חטאותינו ועוונותינו, ואל יהיו עוונותינו מבדילים בינינו לבינך, וכן יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, שתכונן את לבבינו ליראתך ולבבך, ותקשיב אוזניך לדברינו אלה, ותפתח לבבינו הערל בסודות תורתך, ויהיה לימודנו זה נחת רוח, לפני כיסא כבודך קרח ניחוח, ותאציל עלינו, אור מקור נשמתנו בכל בחינתנו, שיתנוצצו ניצוצות עבודיך הקדושים, אשר על ידם גלית דבריך אלה בעולם, זכותם וזכות אבותם, וזכות תורתם ותמימותם וקדושתם, יעמוד לנו לבן כשר בדברים אלו. ובזכותם תראיננו במה שאנו לומדים, כמאמנעים זמירות ישראל. גל עיני והביטה נפלאות מתורתך, כי אדוני ייתן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה, יהיו לו רצון נמרי פי, ויגון ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי וגואלי. Amen. כן יהי רצון.
Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. Now then, I do stop share with that, and we're going to share. Now what we're starting off with, I think we're going to start off with Rabbi Ashlag or Zohar. Let me start off with Rabbi Baruch Shalom Ashlag. I think that's what I want to begin with first. Okay, and then we'll go to the Zohar and then we'll come back again. All right, so this is Parshat Acharie, and it's interesting because the Zohar already discussed the death of Nadav and Avihu in Parshat Shmini, and it goes back and discusses it again, because at the beginning of Acharie, of course it begins with Acharie b'nei Aharon, after the death of the sons of Aharon. Now there's going to be new restrictions on how the Kohanim can come into the temple, and particularly the Kohen Gadol on the day of Yom Kippur, that he's limited, or he can only go into the Kodesh of Kedoshim on Yom Kippur, not at any other day. Okay, and the issue of what this limitation is about, I think is very nicely illustrated in this particular article that we'll be going to be learning from Rabbi Baruch Shalom Ashlag, which we're going to discuss now. Oh, no, good question. Thanks, Fire. Is that better? Hope so.
Thank you.
Yeah. I
Much
don't always
better.
remember. Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. I guess that's why they're called, lapel microphones, that we actually stick them on our lapels. That could be a good reason. Okay, so, all right, so we'll start off with this interesting question. Yesh yayin hamishaker v'yesh yayin hamisameach. V'chein yesh otan bechinot b'Torah. There's wine which makes us drunk, and there's wine which makes us happy. And there are the same equivalent aspects in the Torah. Okay? In other words, you can have too much of a good thing. All right? Now, the word yayin in the Kabbalah actually refers to the light of Chokhmah, the order Chokhmah, the great light that God wants to give us. All right? Now, it's a mistake. 1 second, more people want to come in. Here we go. There we go, right. It's a mistake to think that the so-called wicked people in the Torah were wicked in the sense that we get wicked, all right? It's very clear to us that, very clear to them, that the whole framework of receiving for oneself alone has not got any real light. There's no real light when we receive for ourselves alone. We think there is because that's why we do it. But in fact, it's nothing. It's like a little candle flame. It's like we're like moths to a candle. We grab at any sort of receiving because we don't actually realize that that's not where the real light is at all anyhow. Okay, and when we receive for ourselves alone, we're actually stopping any of the real light coming close. But the wicked of the Torah, the sinners of the Torah, they actually understood this very well. Okay, they all knew that there was no light in the will to receive oneself alone, and in fact, they were great spiritual adepts. Esau, Laban, Pharaoh. All these horrors were actually tremendously powerful spiritual people. So was Bilam, I was obviously, okay? And they worked very hard on themselves and they transformed their wills to receive to the wills to receive for the sake of giving, okay? But they did not put a limit on it, okay? And that is exactly the place of the downfall. All right, you can have what's called too much of a good thing. So even if you're receiving for the sake of giving, it's got to be in a modest way. All right, and the so-called wicked, what they wanted was maximum. All right, and then the moment it's maximum, you can't help yourself, but you begin to receive for yourself alone, and that's the wickedness. All right. So if you take, for example, the Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had the most purest intentions on eating the apple. It's very clear. Rabbi Ashlag writes this incredible introduction in the Panim Me'irot U'Masbirot that, let me just get mentioned again, that that Eve, Chava, had Bina Yetira, even a greater understanding of what the true purpose of man really is, and that is to transform the tree of knowledge of good and evil into the tree of good. And she was right. She wasn't wrong. She was completely right. What she was wrong about was that they took, if you like, too big a bite, all right? They took too much upon themselves, okay? And the moment that it's too much, you can't help but receive oneself alone. And that's the aspect of the wicked. So the aspect of the wicked is yayin hamashaker, taking too much of the light of Chokhmah. In the language of Kabbalah, it's called you've got 10 sfirot, yeah? And you've got the Gimel Rishonot, Keta Chokhmah Bina, and you've got the Zayin Tachtonot, the Chesed Gevur Tiferet Netzach Hod Yesod Malchut. Now, the light which belongs to the top three, the Gimel Rishonot, is light which is forbidden for us. Why is it forbidden? Because we cannot use it in Kedusha reliably. All right, we're liable to go over the top. Its power is too strong and we cannot use it reliably. And so therefore, it's forbidden for us, okay? And when we just receive a sufficient amount, which is according to God's will, all right, what we receive, and we listen to Torah and mitzvot, and we just receive basically the minimum and let it go. The order chokhmah as present only to give evidence, okay, that the light of giving is important and valuable. Then we're happy. Then we give to God and God gives to us and everybody's happy. It's balanced. Okay, we're not trying to get too much. We're not going to get addicted from it. But the yain hamashaker, too much light is actually going to cause us to separate from the Creator. All right, so this is what it's about. כל החטא של בני אהרון שקראו היום בתורה, באמת זה קושיה גדולה. All the sin of the children of Aharon, when Rabbi Baruch Shalom gave this talk, I think it was Motzi Shabbos or something like that, which we read today in the Torah. 1 second, there we go. Which we read in the Torah today, is actually has a lot of questions about it. Yesh ma'amar Chazal, there is a saying of the sages, an article of the sages, Bishvil ma korim hakriya shel bnei Aharon b'yom HaKippurim. Why do we read what happened to the sons of Aharon on Yom Kippur? Shemitat tzadikim mechaperet, that the death of tzadikim atones. Omrim shem chatu v'nisrofu. Ze nikra mitat tzadikim. But we're told that they sinned and their bodies got burned. How can that be called the death of tzadikim? Halo chazal amru shem hayu shikorim. The sages tell us that they were drunk. Lachen amru yain v'sheka al tashet. Therefore they said wine and strong drink don't touch. Shasur l'kohanim lishtaker. It's forbidden for the kohanim to drink wine. V'hem hayu shikorim, and they were drunk. Od ma'amar Chazal, a further statement of the sages, achet haya shelo nasu nashim. The sin was that they didn't marry wives. V'chi magilem onish kokach gadol b'shvil shelo nasu nashim. Do they deserve such a terrible punishment because they didn't marry women? Or they hadn't got married yet? Yesh od midrash. There's another midrash. Shemalchu achrei Moshe v'Aaron v'amru matay yamutu shnei zkenim halalu v'tava gita'am. That they went after Moses and Aaron and said, when will these two old people die? And you and I will lead the people. V'hem hayu machshivim et atzmam שההנהגה שלהם תהיה יותר טובה מההנהגה של משה ואהרון? Is it possible that they really considered themselves that their leadership would be better than the leadership of Moses and Aaron? V'yesh od ma'amar Chazal, there's even another statement of the sages, HaKadosh Baruch Hu amar, that the Holy Blessed One said, B'korvai akadesh, in those who come close to me, I will be sanctified. Shehem amru shehem yoter krovim LaKadosh Baruch Hu miMoshe v'Aaron, from which it seems to say that they were closer to the Holy Blessed One than even was Moses and Aaron. Okay, so what is all this about? It's very strange. Ela b'kol madriga madriga yesh yain hamesameach v'yesh yain hameshaker. But at every single spiritual stage, there is wine that makes one happy and there is wine which makes one drunk. Okay? Maze yain hameshaker. What is the wine that makes you drunk? Yain nikra or chokhmah. The wine is designated as the or ha-chokhmah. It's the light of chokhmah. Okay, remember there's the language of Kabbalah is called the language of the branches. What does that mean? It means that every element in this physical world comes from a spiritual root, okay? So there's a direct connection between our reality in the physical world and its spiritual root in the higher worlds, okay? So he's telling us, we can't see these connections, but the sages can, all right? So he's telling us that the wine, okay, the spiritual root is the order Chokhmah, the light of Chokhmah. And why is it? Because it has this characteristic that a little of a bit makes us happy and too much makes us drunk. Okay, there's something in the chat. I can't know what it is. Is this similar to Nadav and Abihu? It is Nadav and Abihu they're talking about, Penny. It's exactly that. Well done. Okay. All right. So, or chokhmah mukhrach liot mizugim hamayim. So, the order chokhmah needs to be, the light of chokhmah needs to be mizug, mixed with water. All right. With the light of chasadim, the light of loving kindness. And you might have seen people, when they make kiddush, pour a little bit of water into their wine. Okay, that's the reason that they say, you know, that because the wine of Eretz Yisrael is very strong. All right, but the spiritual reason for doing that is that the order Chokhmah, the light of Chokhmah, is mixed with the light of loving kindness. Kashahem muzagim, when they are mixed, Haim Bechinat Moshe. They are considered as the aspect of Moses. Bechinat Kava Imtsa'i, the middle line. Rabbi Gottlieb teaches a lot, okay, that the ends, the extremes, okay, are not healthy for us. Okay, they are absolutely not healthy, whether extreme on the right-hand side or an extreme on the left-hand side, which would be an extremely just giving, which would be the right-hand side, isn't healthy. And just receiving on the left-hand side is certainly not healthy, okay? And what we actually need to come into the middle line. And what is the middle line? The middle line is not a mathematical mean between right and left, as one would think, you know, from maths and things. It's actually a combination, so that the desire of receiving is toned down with the desire of giving, and the desire of giving gains stature because it's mixed with the desire to receive. Okay? So both of these actually gain. So the left-hand side is preventing from going to an extreme, which is going to swallow it up and become drunk. Okay, in this particular analogy. And the right-hand line gains the stature that because the left-hand line is present, its decision to give is now become a more clear, free choice. So both actually gain, and that's the middle line. The middle line takes us from the edges and brings us into a safer place, which is more balanced and more integrated. And then when we get the middle line, Zenika yain hamasamech Elohim va'anashim. This is the wine that delights both God and man. Now, going back to Nadav and Avihu, okay, the sons of Aharon who died, they brought a very, very high spiritual level. Et Or Chokhmah. They brought the great light of Chokhmah. Okay, and they didn't have the power to bring an equivalent amount of the light of Chasadim. All right, it's exactly like Adam and Eve. All right, it was too much. Now, why was it too much? What was it? It was the day of the sanctification of the Mishkan, and the presence of God filled their whole reality. Okay, the presence of God. I mean, so the presence of God was so overpowering for them. Okay, and they weren't able to draw upon the or chasadim, the light of loving kindness. What does this teach us? Well, it teaches us a lot of things because the spiritual sages, the great sages who reach these tremendous heights, they all kept Torah and mitzvot. Okay? All of them. All right? They didn't think, oh, I've already reached a certain level, so I don't need to do Torah and mitzvot anymore. They didn't think that at all. They all kept to Torah and mitzvot. Very simple Torah and mitzvot. Okay? The same shacharit, mincha, mariv that everybody does all the time. They would do it all the time. They do it all the time. Because why? Because the moment you're dealing with high spiritual lights, you've got to keep going with the order chasadim, and that's what the Torah teaches us. Okay, teaches us to keep it in balance. All right, the mitzvot keep us in balance. Nimtza sheshatu yain bli mayim. So what did the Nadav and Avihu do? They drank wine, if you like, the order chokhmah, but without water, without the light of chasadim. So it's like just receiving this great light without the ability to do the work of giving. And this is called the wine which gets a person drunk. Okay, so that explains one of those midrashim already. Okay, why the sages said they were drunk. This is also designated as they didn't marry women. Isha nikret masach va'oviut. Okay, the woman represents both the desire, but also the ability to put a barrier over that desire. Oviut nikra hishtokokut lelukut. On the one hand, the desire is the yearning for godliness. And this needs to be mixed with the light of loving kindness. Lo nasu lehem nashim, they didn't marry women. Klomar shelo haya biyochotam lamshich al madriga shel hagimel u'shonot hachokma or the chasadim. Means that they did not have in their ability to bring on the spiritual stage of the gimel u'shonot of chokhmah, the light of chasadim. Madua, why was that? Hakol mitbatel bifnei madriga kukach gvua. Everything was nullified because through a stage which was so high. Im ken mitzad echad hem hayu b'madriga yoter gvua miMoshe v'Aharon. On the one hand, so they really were of a spiritual stage which was higher than that of Moses and Aharon. Aval mitzad sheni haya yain hameshaker. But on the other hand, it was wine which was causing them to be drunk. It was too much. Okay? So what we said was we work with the lower seven sfirot and not with the first three sfirot, not all 10 sfirot, only the lower seven. And this also explains why, when we work on the counting of the Omer, we count 7 times 7, okay, not 10 times 10. All right, if we've got 10 sfirot, why aren't we counting 10 sfirot each time? But we can't work with the first three. The first three are too much for us. Okay, we only work with the lower seven, which are got smaller, which actually make up mostly the middle line. They've got smaller lights, more balanced lights. Oh, there was one new message I didn't see, sorry. It's disappeared. I don't know. Right. Okay. All right. Now, that's right. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to look at a piece from the Zohar. Okay, so we're going to go first of all to the Zohar, and then we'll come back and look at this piece here. All right. There we go. All right. Acharie Shnei B'nei Aharon. Rabbi Yitzchak Patach. Oh, can you see this all right? I didn't think to change the screen. I'm not quite sure what it does here. I better just put.
Oh, okay.
It
Can I
was.
ask you a quick question while we're in an interlude?
Yeah. Sure. Absolutely.
What was it that you were reading from? What was the Hebrew from in the first part we were just doing?
Yeah. So sorry, it's a book called Rabbi Shalom, and it's a collection of Rabbi Baruch Shalom Ashlag's writings. Now, Rabbi Baruch Shalom was very interesting. He taught orally from his father's work. He gave oral lessons. He didn't write that much, and he had a peculiar habit of, rather endearing habit in my view, of just grabbing any piece of paper that was lying there and writing down his thoughts. So it could be a cigarette paper, it could have been a paper napkin, it could have been, anything, all right? And he wrote on the margins of his books. He wrote all over the place, just like that, just thoughts, whatever piece of paper there was, he would use. And so after he'd passed away, Rabbi Gottlieb got all these pieces of paper together and started to organize them, all right, in different ways. So we have, there was only one set of writings where he actually sat and wrote essays, and that's called Sefer Ma'amarim. And this book is sort of a collection of a lot of those pieces of writings where he would write them down on serviettes or cigarette papers or I don't know what. Okay, and Rabbi Gottlieb put them together, and you have a 4-volume set called Bracha Shalom, and it's very lovely. Okay, so
thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's Rabbi Baruch Shalom Ashlag. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Acharie Shnei B'nei Aharon. Rabbi Yitzchak Patach, Ivdu et Hashem b'yir'ah, v'gilu b'yirada. Uketiv Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, ba'u lefanav b'yonana. Hanikrai kashian ahadadei, ela hachitana Ivdu et Hashem b'yir'ah, דכל פולחנה דבאי באנש ולפלח כמי מערי, וקדמתה באי יראה, לדחלה מיני, ובגין דחלה דמערי ישתכח לבטה דיעביד בחדוותה פיקודי אורייתא. ועדה כתיב מה השם אלוקיך שואל ממך, כי אם ליראה. Here we are, it's number 2, that's what we need. Okay, so it's here. All right. After the death of the 2 sons of Aharon, Rabbi Yitzchak opened his discourse. Ivdat Hashem b'yir'ah, v'gilu b'yir'adah. Serve the Lord with reverence, rejoice with trembling. V'ketiv ivdat Hashem b'simcha, bo'u lefanav b'yonana. But it's also written, serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with jubilation. Mikra'ot elu sotrin ze et ze. These scriptures contradict each other. Shekan omer lavod b'yir'ah. One says to serve with fear and trembling. V'kan omer b'simcha. And one says with joy, u'b'yonana, and with jubilation. Meshiv ela kach lamadnu. But what we have learnt, Ivdu et Hashem b'yir'ah, serve the Lord with fear, and I'll talk about what that means in a moment. Ki b'kol avodah she'rotze adam lavod lifnei Rabbono, b'tchila tzarich yir'ah. Because in every work that a person wants to serve before his master, b'tchila, first tzarich yir'ah, he needs fear. Li'arei mipanav, to have reverence of him or to have fear of him. But because of the fear of his master, of he will merit afterwards to do with joy the mitzvot of the Torah. What does the Lord your God ask of you? But only to have reverence or fear. And in this way, he will merit to everything. Let me just see the Gilu to go on. Now that's the bit we need. So before we go into Rabbi Baruch Shalom, I want to just first of all define for ourselves what is Yirah. Okay, because those of us who come from a Western background don't usually have a very clear idea of what Yirat Hashem actually is. Okay, Yirat Hashem, fear of God, is actually a problem. Okay, because most of us have maybe sort of some inner image, all right, of some judgmental God sitting in the sky, ready to dole out punishments or whatever, okay, which definitely comes, it's not a Jewish image, but it's a lot of people from the West have that, okay? And so Yirat Hashem, fear of God, is not an actually helpful translation because it tends to summon up these rather scary images. But Yirat Hashem, that Rav Ashlag explains it, and he explains it in the first volume of the Zohar. He explains it like this. If you have a beloved, okay, then you're concerned not to do anything that's going to separate you from your beloved. In other words, if you've got a husband, child, somebody you love, then you're careful, you know what they like and you know what they don't like. Then you have awareness and you're careful not to do anything that's going to cause separation, anger, dislike, whatever between you. Okay? Ivdu Hashem b'yirah, serve the Lord with, I would say reverence, I would say awareness, okay? What's going to bring me close, what's going to separate me, okay? And reverence, awareness, that's slightly closer. Of course, there is an element of Yirah when you awesomeness, okay? When you realize how great God is and how small we really are. So that's also that idea of awesomeness also comes in, all right? So rejoice, bir'adah, with trembling, okay? You're trembling from desire, you're trembling from the fact that you want to be close to God, and on the other hand, you have this awareness that one needs to also have awareness of how great God is, okay, and how very small we are in comparison. All right, so that's the issue of Yirat Hashem, that I'm afraid to do something that's going to separate me from the beloved. And I find that very helpful concept, a very helpful translation. And so what the Zohar is saying here is that these two statements don't contradict each other as they seem to, all right? But in fact, one aspect needs to come first, and then the other aspect follows. So that first of all, we have to develop our Yirah, okay? And then we can come to our Simcha, all right? So it'd be like, for example, the psalmist says, Sor meira v'asei tov, okay? Turn away from the negative, and then you can come to do the positive, all right? So we can take that, they don't actually contradict, but they are sequential. All right, that's what the Zohar is telling us here. Now let's go to Rabbi Baruch and see how he explains it. Yeah. Acharie mot shnei bnei Aharon, after the death of the two sons of Aharon, Rabbi Yitzhak opened his discourse. Ivdu et Hashem b'yirah v'gilu b'yirah v'chule. עבדו את השם בשמחה, בואו לפניו ברננה וכו'. מקודם צריכה להיות יראה, בגין דחל אדם הרי ישתכח לבטה דאביד בחדוותה פיקודי דאורייתא. מקורות אלו סותרים זה את זה, בתחילה צריך יראה וכו', ובשביל יראת ריבונו, יזכה לאחר כך לעשות בשמחת מצוות התורה. ועל כן כתוב, מה השם אלוקיך שואל ממך, כי אם ליראה, שעל ידה יזכה לכל. So we actually just read that piece. That's exactly the same piece we read. And now he begins to bring in another piece of Zohar, a few paragraphs further on. Ma katuv kan, what is written here? Acharie mot shnei bnei Aharon, following the death of the two sons of Aharon, v'achar kach, Ki bezot yavo Aharon. That with the zot, Aharon will come into the Holy of Holies. All right? What does bezot mean? In this, bezot, in this, what does it mean exactly? What's the connection between the death of the sons of Aharon and the word zot? Okay? And the sages tell us that the aspect of zot, the word zot, is the issue of yirat shamayim, b'yirah, with reverence of heaven. Mikan shirut lizdahara b'ha'izot, v'da'ihu yirat Hashem. This is the beginning to warn the Kohanim, and in fact everybody else as well, that we need to take care with the zot hazo, this word zot. Shezohi yirat Hashem, which in fact refers to yirat Hashem. What is he talking about? He's talking about the Malchut. Okay? One of the words for the Malchut in the Zohar is the word zot. Okay? When you get to the word zot, okay, you're talking about the Malchut. And what's the Malchut? The Malchut is the governance. The word Malchut means governance. How do we govern ourselves in that moment-to-moment decisions? Are we governing ourselves with respect? Or are we governing ourselves with, just I want to get something? All right? So that governance, Malchut means governance. How do we govern ourselves? So we need to ask the question, Yir'ah zo mahi, what actually is Yir'ah? Shal yadei yizkeh simcha, that through which we can merit to simcha. Shem mashmash Yir'ah inyan siba shal yadei yizkeh simcha. And in fact, it follows that the Yir'ah is the cause, is the first cause, and then through that we can get to the simcha. So we need to first understand more clearly what is Yir'ah. Because as we've clearly seen, Yir'ah and Simcha are two opposite things. Yir'ah is fear, reverence, awesomeness, awareness. I don't want to be separated. And Simcha is like much more, joyful. Okay, so they seem to be opposites. We also need to ask another question. Inyan Yir'ah shekatuv, the issue of Yir'ah, that it's written, Ma Hashem lokecha sho'el mimcha kim liyir'ah. Why does it say, what does the Lord your God ask of you only to have reverence? Mashmash inyan Yir'ah hu shakodesh baruch hu rotzeh shiru mefanav. Does it really mean that God wants us to have reverence of him? What possible need can God have that we should have fear of him? It seems to imply in the verse that God has in some way a need that we should have fear of him. And in exchange, God will give goodness to every human being. Chazal, as the sages said, Chazal, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mirat shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven except for the reverence of God, fear of heaven. It doesn't it possibly mean that because God doesn't have Yir'ah, therefore he needs us to give it to him? And this, of course, is not possible to say in any way whatsoever. Because the Holy Blessed One doesn't lack anything that the created beings need to give him anything. So what is the importance that God has that the created beings should have reverence for him? It would be like a person who walks into a hen coop and wants that all the hens should have reverence of him. And in exchange, he'll give to the hens or whatever they want to eat and drink. To an even greater extent, it is for the created beings regard the Creator. We don't even have the value of chickens with respect to a man, or as ourselves with respect to the Creator. So what is the yirah for? Okay? We have to say that yirah, as is written in the Parasha Sulam, in the article on the Pikudim, that's what it is. That a person needs to have fear that maybe he won't be able to intend with his actions to give pleasure to the Creator. Okay? From which we can see that the whole issue of yirah is not for the goodness of for welfare of God, but it's for our welfare. Since there was a tzimtzum, that means a constriction on the vessels of receiving, and we're not now able to receive freely without any conjunction like we did in the Ein Sof. And now they become an empty space, an empty vessel, which has no longer got the highest bounty. And the goodness and joy is not shining there that God wants to give the created beings. Therefore, we need to serve with reverence. What's the connection? The issue is like this. Following the tzimtzum, our vessels of receiving are empty, okay? And the only way they can be full, and not quite full like that either, is if all our receiving is intended only for the sake of giving benefit, okay? But not if we receive for ourselves alone. If we receive for ourselves alone, we fall into the framework of evil. And so any receiving needs to be accompanied with concern. Am I going to receive for myself alone? All right, that's the yirah he's talking about. All right, I don't want to be by accident or on purpose pushed to receive for myself alone. Okay, because the moment I do that, I'm out of the framework of holiness. Okay? Therefore, we need to work with yirah because there's a kind of vacuum. All right? Because we're not fulfilled with the light of the highest one, because we're not in affinity of form. So there is a vacuum. And so then we have to have that concern that because of that vacuum, I might be tempted to go and grab from anything from the framework of evil. And that would be receiving for myself alone. All right? Because we don't like a vacuum very much. And so therefore we need to serve with yirah, with deference, with reverence, okay? And okay, just accept that that's the way it is right now. So a person needs to focus his work of Torah and mitzvot that we merit to get to the aspect of yirah. That in every matter that he does, whether it's a thought or not a thought, I meant a speech or an action, you can't control your thoughts. You get what thoughts God gives you. But speech and action we can control, okay? And so therefore we need to consider, am I speaking in an appropriate way? Am I acting in an appropriate way which gives pleasure to the Creator? ואז כשיהיה לו הכלי הזה שלא יצא לקבל שום דבר, אלא באמנת להשפיע יזכה לשמחה. And then when he has this vessel that he doesn't want to receive anything except for the sake of giving, then he merits to simcha. And then he will merit that the goodness and the joy that he has there in the vessels will shine forth. And it's if we have that yirah first, okay, then I don't want to be separated from the Creator under any circumstances whatsoever. That's the safeguard, okay, that when the joy comes, that when the light comes, we won't take too much of it, because our whole focus is not to do anything that's going to cause us to separate from the Creator. So if we've got that as our basis, if we've got that as our foundation, all right, then even when the joy comes, even when the light comes, we're not going to go over the top, which is what happened to Nadav and Abihu. And they were great tzaddikim. There's no two ways around it. They really were great tzaddikim. They'd reached these tremendous lights, okay? So we need to have that safeguard, okay? And the issue of bezot, that you come into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. Why only on Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, you've got the maximum amount of the order Hasadim. You've got the maximum amount of the right-hand side of the light of Hasadim. It's a day in which we absolutely refrain from any receiving, no eating, no drinking, no shoes on feet, no intercourse with your husband and wife. There's no receiving, okay? It's entirely giving, all right? Entirely giving, all right? The whole day you spend davening, okay? And you're not receiving anything. So that means that there's no possibility of our receiving on Yom Kippur. All right, so even though that great light is present, and it needs to be present in order to forgive sins on Yom Kippur, nevertheless, how does Aharon go into the Holy of Holies? Bezot. And the word zot is yirat shamayim, okay, with the governance of yirah, all right? That's how he comes in. And that keeps everything straight. Everything means that we're not going to get too much light. We're not going to go in the way of Nadav and Avihu, who brought too much light because it wasn't balanced. So in Yan Shel Yirah, Mitzad Hashem en shum ishtanut. From our side, the issue of Yirah is our protection, because from God's side, nothing changes. Ki ratzono leitiv, his desire is to give goodness. But in order that we should not receive the bread of shame, that is in the Ein Sof, that there was the reason why the Tzimtzum happened, okay, was that we wanted to be the Malchut of the Ein Sof, the vessel of the Ein Sof, wanted to be less of a receiver and more of a giver. It wanted to be more like the light, and could sense that there was a possibility of being not quite in affinity of form if we were just receiving as we were in the Ein Sof. And that caused the Tzimtzum, that caused the Tikkun, that from the Tzimtzum onwards, we should only receive only for the sake of giving. And if we can't receive for the sake of giving, then simply don't receive. Okay, which is most of our reality. Don't receive this great light if you can't receive it for the sake of giving. Okay, so from now on we need this tremendous yirah, so that we're not got pulled after receiving the joy. Therefore, if a person has got this foundation that he's clear, he doesn't want to receive for himself alone, he doesn't want to do anything that's going to separate him from his beloved, so now he's prepared and ready, and he can receive the highest light. Because he's got concern that he won't cause a defect in this tikkun. From this we can see that yirah is the basis, the cause, the direct cause of joy. Because the joy is the consequence of receiving the good and joy. וכיוון שיש לו כלי לקבל, בטח שנותנים לו כמה שהוא יכול לקבל במנת להשפיע. And since he has a vessel for receiving, so then they will give him how much he's able to receive, only for the sake of giving, okay? But he himself has to put that boundary, that he doesn't receive too much. כי מצד העליון אין הגבלות על השפע, because from the side of the Creator, there's no limits to the bounty. And Rabbi Gottlieb adds, and it's very interesting what he adds, this article is talking about the death of the children of the sons of Aharon, and because their death came about because their yu'ah wasn't fully in place. They pulled towards themselves too much of that light of Chokhmah. And they weren't concerned whether or not they would be able to intend for the sake of giving on this great light. And that was the reason they fell, that the wicked in their lifetime are considered as dead. So on the one hand, they really were tzaddikim, and therefore we do read this Parasha on Yom Kippurim, because the death of tzaddikim atones. They really were, had tremendous passion and desire to come close to God. And they had corrected their vessels only for the sake of giving to an enormous extent. Their mistake was that they thought that they would be able to correct even for the sake of giving and giving pleasure to the Creator on such a great light. Okay, like Adam and Eve, they had good intentions too. And they weren't able to. And if they had got it balanced with the appropriate yu'ah, the appropriate reverence, the appropriate care, that they didn't want to get separated no matter what, they wouldn't have even tried. Okay? So that's a very interesting take, I think, on the death of Nadav and Avihu. And there's one more thing I wanted to do today in Parshat Kedoshim. We've got 5 minutes, all we need. Fantastic. There we are, small one to do with V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Okay? What does the general principle of love your neighbor as yourself give you? It's through this general principle we can come to loving God. 612 commandments. Okay, so if you've got 612, all right, the general principle is, all right, love your neighbor as yourself. Klal gadol b'Torah. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is called a klal gadol b'Torah, a great general principle of the Torah. Rabbi Akiva called it that. All right? All right, so through this general principle, we can get to loving God. Okay? So if we can just do V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, why can't we just do that and then we can love God and we're done? What do we need the other 612 commandments for? Why don't we just do V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? All right? That seems to be the question here. Kodem kol tzuchim ladat ma ze klal. So in order to answer this question, we first need to know what is a general principle. Yadua sheklal nivna al harbe pratim. To get to a general principle, we need lots and lots of individual elements. Ubli pratim ifshar sheyeh klal. Without the individual elements, you can't get to a general rule. Kudugmat she'anu omrim, and in a similar way we say, Kihila Kadisha, a holy congregation. הכוונה על כמה פרטים שנאספו ונתרבו להיות חטיבה אחת. And what we mean is we've got several, actually 10 individuals who've joined together and gathered together to form one band. ואחר כך ממנים ראש הקהל, and once you've got the basics of the community, the קהילה קדישה, the holy congregation, then you appoint one to be the head, one to be the gabbai, and all the rest of it. וזה נקרא מניין או עדה, and this is called the minyan, or it's called the congregation if it's a bit bigger. שלכל הפחות צריכים להיות 10 אנשים, at minimum it needs to have 10 people. אז יכולים לומר קדושה, and then you can say various prayers like קדושה and Kaddish and things like that. ועל זה אמרו בזוהר הקדוש, and on this the Zohar הקדוש says, כל בי 10 שכינתה שריה. Wherever there is 10, the Shekhinah is inspired, is resting. שפירושו הוא שבמקום שיש 10 אנשים כבר יש מקום להשראת השכינה. That when you have 10 men, you already have the influence, the inspiration of the Shekhinah. ולפי זה יוצא שהכלל ואהבת לרעך כמוך בנוי על תרי"ג מצוות. Now in the same way, if you've got a general principle, which is love your neighbor as yourself, it's a general principle because it's made up of the 612 mitzvot. היינו, אם אנו נקיים את התרי"ג מצוות, אז נוכל לבוא לכלל ואהבת לרעך. In other words, if we fulfill the 612 mitzvot, then we can come to the general principle of love your neighbor. נמצא שהפרטים נותנים לנו להגיע לכלל. We therefore find that the individual elements that give us, allow us to reach the general principle. כשיהיה לנו הכלל, and when we have that general principle, אז נוכל להגיע לאהבת השם, then we can get to the love of God. כמו שכתוב, קלטה נפשי לשם, my soul yearns for God. It reminds me of a story of the great Rav and sage and posek, Moshe Feinstein. Okay, in America, he was one of the greatest poskim. He really was. Very, very, very humble man. A very kind man also. Very humble. Lived in a little flat somewhere, I think in New York. And one day, one of the people who knew him saw him on the subway in New York. And I don't know, the subway in New York is not like the most, auspicious place, but you would expect to find a great sage, traveling. And so he goes over to him and he says, Rav, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm on my way to a wedding. And he says, oh, is it a relative? He says, no. He said, actually, I'm not quite sure who it is. So it turns out that the Rav had heard of an orphan who was getting married, and there was some concern that he didn't have any relatives and there might not be people there, l'sameach hatan v'kala. And so he heard that and he dropped what he was doing, went on the subway to go to be sameach hatan v'kala, to a hall he didn't know, to a chosn he didn't know, in order to be sameach hatan v'kala. And here is this man who definitely fulfilled all the mitzvot of the Torah. He was a great, great, great posek. Okay? And therefore you can really see that those two elements of fulfilling all the mitzvot of the Torah and v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha absolutely came together. And according to Rabbi Ashlag, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is built up out of our commitment to the other 612 mitzvot. And even though it's totally true that a person is not able to fulfill all the 612 mitzvot on his own, לממשל פדיון הבן, he can't necessarily do pidyon haben. Shim nolda lo bat techila, k'vay no yochol lekayim mitzvot pidyon haben. For if he's got a daughter got born first, he can't do pidyon haben. Also, for example, if he happens to be a Kohen, he can't do pidyon haben. Likewise, a woman is exempt from mitzvot which are time-based, like tzitzit and tefillin. But because all Israel is guarantors for each other, we find that through all of them, through everybody, everything gets fulfilled. Okay, also in time, all right? So that people brought the sacrifices. We can't bring sacrifices. The temple's not built. But nevertheless, we are arevim zelazeh also in time, so that the previous generations brought the sacrifices, okay? So they are also arevim for us. And we are arevim for them, because we can also do tikkun on what they didn't manage to do tikkun on. All right, so for example, the sin of the second temple was sinat chinam. So we can do the mitzvah of ahavat chinam and correct what happened with them. Okay, so it's all as Israel is arevim zelazeh, not just in this generation, but also forwards and backwards in time as well. So everybody together is taking part in the fulfillment of all Torah mitzvot. And so this is as if everybody together fulfills all the mitzvot. Therefore we find that if when we fulfill all the Torah mitzvot, there is a light in the Torah, there's a light in the mitzvot, which brings us to the good way, and we can then reach the generality of loving our neighbor as ourselves, and that is the springboard to the love of God. Okay, wonderful. Baruch Hashem. So we looked today at Yirah, we looked at Simcha, which comes from it, we looked at Ahava and love, loving your neighbor. All right, wonderful.
Wow, Yesha Koach, Toda Rabba. It's excellent. So glad to be here.
That's wonderful. Baruch Hashem, I'm so glad to be with everybody. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yetida. Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Yadida.
Shabbat Shalom.
Have a
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
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 Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.